Now, why do you think we are going down this path? Do you think California is doing this to actually acknowledge that this was horrific to these people that was happening in other areas, or why do you think the California state is going down this path?
Well, now you're asking me to hypothesize about the motives of the people behind the commission, but I can certainly tell you that one of the reasons for it is that it provides good politics for a certain group of people. I think there are a small number of people in California, and I really do believe this, a tiny number of people who are motivated by what they recognize as a horrible system, that is slavery and the racist system that followed afterward, especially in the South, and who believe we've just got to do something somewhere. We live here, let's do it here. And they are willing, either purposely or because they're ignorant, they're willing to overlook the reality of what the world has been like and the relative prosperity and freedom of California in order to make a point that, we're all guilty in this. There's a kind of collective guilt, and so we're all going to have to pay. I think that's one reason. I think the other reason is it provides some people who are unscrupulous with an explanation for enduring black poverty that lets especially Democrats and the left off the hook. For 50 or 60 years, California has been at the front end of the kinds of social welfare programs that were supposed to really lift people out of poverty. And those very programs have in fact damaged people, especially people who are from minority communities and especially black people. There's zero doubt. There is absolute correlation between the fact that you get the rise of social welfare programs nationally and the decline of the African American family.
And how do they damage the
I'll give you one
community? Because they're supposed to help, like these.
Of course, yeah. So I'll give you one example. We have a public education system in California that has produced the most baleful, the worst results for African Americans in the entire state. African American children who graduate from the 12th grade in California frequently cannot read or do math at grade level. In fact, about 10% of kids who graduate, who are black, who graduate from high school, 10% of them can do math at grade level.
Wow.
About 30% can read at grade level, read and write. So the public education system is bad and has gotten worse over the last, say, 40 years. And that correlates with teachers' union control of the system. Teachers' unions, and I'm not talking about rank and file teachers, I'm talking about the unions, are absolutely against giving up, surrendering any kind of control over public education. This is their money machine. It's their ATM. They are not going to reform the system. But they can't acknowledge that black performance, student performance on achievement tests has collapsed, because that would indict the system. And that would endanger the teachers union, and that would endanger the politician like Gavin Newsom, whom those teachers support. The California Teachers Association raises and spends about $300 million per year, $600 billion every election, million dollars every election cycle, $600 million every 2 years. And
$600 million.
$600 million every election cycle. And it's spent primarily in organizing at the local level and bargaining and lobbying local officials. But it's on politics. And they spend it on campaigns. They spend it sending out volunteers to support campaigns. We could go on. But the point is, it's all raised and spent on politics and lobbying. So they have a power that is unmatched by anybody else to help get people elected. There's not a politician in Sacramento on the Democrat side who, if they take money from the teachers union, they almost all do, is willing to go after the teachers union and say, hey, look, black achievement is a catastrophe, it's racist in its outcomes, and we need to fix education. Teachers union won't go for it. If you doubt that, we could talk a lot about school choice and how to enhance schools, but the bottom line is the teachers union is not open to reform, and its cash flows into Democrats. So the Democrats who created the Reparations Commission are not going to suggest the first step we ought to take is to fix public education. They will say we should give all that money to the teachers. I'm sure of it. Let's pour money into the public education system that has failed black people for 40 years. So the most racist institution, I would argue, in California isn't your individual corporation or your business who are just trying to make money and will take it from you whether you're black or white. They don't care if they're smart. It's government. Government has created a catastrophe for black people. And if you doubt that, then take a look at what critical race theory tells us.
Do you think they are actually trying to create these kind of programs to compensate for things that they've not done well at? 'Cause
Yes.
you mentioned the public school and.
Yes.
But a program like this, it will cost a significant amount, right?
That's right.
And there's another proposal in San Francisco to do
Yeah.
5 million. Can you tell us more about that one?
Sure. San Francisco, not to be outdone by the, gosh, what can you call it, the lunacy of the state's proposal, decided that they were going to have their own system and their own reparations commission. So they've created a commission in San Francisco that has determined that every black resident who can prove descent from a 19th century African American, and there's a few other qualifiers in there that could allow you into this system, that everyone who lives in San Francisco and has identified as black for 10 years and can prove ancestry to a black American in the 19th century should be given $5 million. Now let's check that number against the state recommendation, which is 223,000, which some of our
20 times more or something.
it's a lot of money. And it's something that is so utterly remarkable. If just half of San Francisco's black residents qualified for the program, you're talking about a program that's nearly $120 million.
Billion or million?
Million. I'm sorry, billion.
Billion.
So
Yeah,
sorry.
because-
Gosh, so sorry.
because-
Yes,
yeah.
thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for correcting me. We have to do something about those two numbers to fix them so we don't keep making these mistakes, or at least I don't. So right now, San Francisco's annual budget is about $14 billion. This proposal would be somewhere in the neighborhood of $120 billion or so dollars. And that's just if half of the people qualify. If all of them qualify, look out. I mean, you're talking about a cost to that city of about $250 billion, $250 billion.
Now, who's going to pay for this? Because I assume the rest of the Californians.
Well, in San Francisco's case, it's only San Francisco.
Okay.
So this would probably bankrupt the city. I don't understand the math. They likely don't either. But this would bankrupt the city. The other thing that it would do that's interesting, I think, is create a racial crisis where there hasn't been much of one yet. But if you want to go back and see what might happen, here's what I would argue is going to happen. You're going to have a revolt among
Because a lot of the immigrants, they say we came here, like myself,
Right.
and we had nothing to do with this.
We had nothing to do with this. That's right.
And essentially, we kind of have to pay for it. Is that?
You've got it exactly right. The Asian American community is a really good example of that. You know, Asian Americans in California historically were treated terribly.
Like Chinese, right?
Chinese especially. Virtually everybody who's watching your show knows the Chinese built the railroads, worked in gold mines, lived in Chinatowns that were occasionally ransacked by angry white mobs, and their homes were burned to the ground. Chinese are not considered likely candidates for reparations. Japanese were interned in a series of concentration camps during World War II. They got reparations from the federal government because it was a federal order that did that, and that was just. So,
And they got it at that time, right? Or did they get it right?
No, they got it about 40 years later. Yeah. But what's interesting is that San Francisco, just a couple of years ago, had a school board that started getting involved in this kind of like critical race theory and talking about and really redressing the racism in San Francisco. And what they meant was they pointed at a couple of schools in San Francisco that are very, very good schools that are application only. One of them is called Lowell. And to get into Lowell High School, I have a point here, I swear to you. To get into Lowell High School, you had to apply in a blind sort of application process, school grades and testing. And then you got in on merits only. We didn't know who you were, we didn't know your name, we didn't know your race or ethnicity or your gender, nothing. Well, the result of that total blind application process was that the school suddenly became 70 to 75% Chinese and Asian American. Chinese and Asian Americans in general just outcompeted everybody else, whites,
They work
Latinos,
very
and
hard.
blacks.
They study, and the Tiger Moms.
They turn out, yeah. For whatever the reason is, Asian American kids in San Francisco turn out to be far better students than their peers in other ethnic groups, right? They just outperformed. Well, the San Francisco School Board, comprised of a number of progressive people, many of them of African American descent, said this is clearly a racist outcome. Therefore, the school has to drop its its system of allowing students in and has to accept people based on race and ethnicity. Well, Asian Americans said, whoa, wait a minute. We worked hard to achieve entry into Lowell High School, and Lowell is a feeder school into Berkeley and Stanford. Our kids worked for this. And they organized a recall. Some of your listeners
we actually had the organizers, one of the groups
good.
on the show.
That's
yeah.
great. Well, then you know all about it. They organized this, and they recalled the 3 members of the board who were eligible for recall, and they just shocked the entire county up there and the world. I mean, this was an international story, that a school board that had gotten so deeply into the progressive policies of critical race theory and trying to carry that out in practice in the education system in San Francisco, an education system which, by the way, has utterly failed black kids, utterly failed black kids. Their response was, gotta be racism, can't be anything else. And so they launched what I would argue is a racist attack on Asian Americans. Never mind that white people are not performing very well and getting into Lowell, or that Latinos aren't. And they won. The Asian Americans came out over 90% to fight for that recall and vote for it.
And it seems like we're getting more and more divided as the race conversation goes on and on. Because when I came here like 20 years ago, I felt like everybody was the same.
Everybody was pretty cool.
You know, and everybody was, now you have to watch out, like if this person's Asian, this person's black, this person's white.
That's right.
You have to think like how you're going to talk to them.
That's right.
You know?
Well, I think, what's unfortunate is I think that's still generally true, is that there is a noisy minority of people who will hound you and will try to destroy you, and sometimes with the help of major institutions will in fact succeed in destroying you. So the fact that a guy with this face is talking about race is very, very dangerous. And my hope is that people will understand that both you and I are really here because we believe that if you follow the constitutional logic of the entire American experiment, it's about equality under the law. It's about giving everybody a chance to succeed on their own merits in the pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness. So what's changed is we've lost our affection for the Constitution and for that lofty goal. As recently as the 60s, when I was a little kid, you could hear Martin Luther King asking that people be judged on the content of their character, not on the color of their skin. And that was the sort of formative logic in the home I grew up in, was that you never judge people by gender, by race, by any of what my dad used to call the superficialities. You judge them by their heart, by their earnestness, by their talent. That's how you judge people. And let merit win out. That's what made America great.
Is this the reason why you wrote this article and you wanted to kind of get into this debate?
Yeah, it is, because I think that the real goal here on the part of the state of California is to ignore the racist outcomes of virtually every public education system that we have set up in this state, the public education system we've set up in the state, that we engage in climate regulation that most grievously affects the poor, including poor black people. When gasoline prices go up, poor black people pay more for transportation. How is that fair? When the government raises the rates, electricity rates, poor people, including poor black people, pay more than their fair share for energy. How is this fair? So the government is truly the thing that the Reparations Committee should be looking at. That all these government social services, and I really singled out education because I think that's the thing that makes a difference in a person's life. Quality education for young people, black, white, whatever. That makes the difference. The Reparations Committee, CMAC, they legitimately pointed out the problem of what they call, what many people have come to call the school-to-prison pipeline. That kids who can't read by the third grade can't really read to learn, right? The old saying goes, first you learn to read and then you read to learn. If you can't read by the third grade, you're in trouble, and yet the results are in. Black kids can't read by the third grade. And so the commission says, see, it's a racist system. So why are we trying to double down on a system that has been in existence for 120 years, our public education system, and has been made worse by the application of a union layered over the top of that system that is against any kind of reform, any kind of parental choice, anything that would significantly change this? Why have we opted instead for the language of racism to explain the failure of a public school system that is run in many counties, including Los Angeles, by a teachers union that is dominated by African American activists? What's going on here? So the real racist outcome, the logic of the left is always that you can judge a system racist if its outcomes are racially disparate. Our public education has disparate impacts for blacks, whites, Asian Americans. It is, by the definition of the left itself, the most racist institution in California.
Now, Will, you were talking about these topics. This is a very touchy topic.
Yes.
And you decided to write this. Aren't you afraid of getting canceled? Because this is a very tough environment right now to discuss anything with race, right?
Yes, it is. And yet, if people don't step up regardless of their race, color, gender, ethnicity, if they don't step up and really push back against this thing, California is headed for a new dark ages. And I'm talking about the medieval dark ages of totally. This reparations payment will not do what its adherents say. What it will do is spark ethnic rivalry and racial conflict. That's what it'll do. Very quickly, you're going to find people in San Francisco who are paying huge amounts of money for a crime they didn't commit to people who did not suffer from that crime, who are enraged. They came here expecting a fair deal, whether they came from Mexico or Central America or Africa or China or wherever. They came here expecting a fair shake. They came here under the old understanding that you encountered when you got here, that everybody would be given a fair deal. People weren't going to judge you on your skin, and if they did, it wouldn't matter because you were still going to be able to succeed under the law.
The system wouldn't judge you.
That's right.
That's the...
Yeah.
Now, why are you doing this? Why are you talking about this issue? Like, it seems like you're passionate about it. And
I am. Yeah, I do think there's a problem of race in the system in California. I just think the Reparations Committee is way off track. Its history is bad. We've already talked about that. They don't understand the history of race in California or slavery. So they start from a false premise before that, and that is that people who didn't commit a crime have to pay people who didn't suffer from it. So then they make up a bunch of stories having to do with critical race theory, which suggests that the real problem, the real failures of California's its African American population can be ascribed to slavery instead of ascribed to the government programs that have immiserated them.
And was there a moment you realized that you've got to jump in because this is...
When I read the commission's 500-page report, it's comic in its misunderstanding of California history. And you can only laugh until you realize that, of course, the implications of this report are going to be damaging to California, to Californians. And if California fails, I'm telling you, the United States fails. We are too big. California is about almost 15% of the nation's population. If we fail, we take down an entire country with us. And our ideas, you and I have talked about this before, CMAC, California's bad ideas go national really fast, especially like under a Democratic federal administration or a Democratic Congress. Ideas that seem very faddish and sort of culturally of the moment in California are amplified by the federal government quite frequently, whether it's on climate or race or water or energy, you name it. Federal government always finds California's ideas very sexy, very attractive. And the challenge with that is, if California fails, America fails with it. If America fails, the lights go out all over the world.
And it seems like we're painting ourselves in the wrong way, as the history of California tells a different story, right?
That's right. The history of California is like the history of human beings almost everywhere. Life is difficult, wherever you are. This is the dark secret of human life. Life is tough. And once you acknowledge that it's tough, universally, then you can start to say, what makes it a little better? It's never going to be perfect. But utopian thinking that it is perfect or could be perfect is damaging to what works. So that you have bad ideas pushing good ideas out of the marketplace. Bad ideas like reparations commissions or a teachers union run public education system chase out all the good ideas of human freedom and human flourishing.
And we were talking offline, you kind of believed in these ideas back in the day, right? Yourself,
I did.
You were a journalist.
Yeah.
And
Well, before I was a journalist, I was a communist. And I'm not proud of that. I went to the University of Southern California, which, for people who understand what USC is supposed to represent, a very conservative place, is sort of surprising and weird. But I was there in the late 1970s. I was a theology major. I was studying, I hoped to become a priest, but I fell in with something called liberation theology, which was the then very fashionable idea that Jesus had come primarily to support the poor, the materially poor, against the rich, and that the best way to implement Jesus' ideas of the Gospels was to become a Marxist, literally, to engage in class conflict. So at one point I was playing a little punk rock band, and I had a little crucifix that I wore to our shows that was at 2 AK-47s. Yeah, I know, it's rather embarrassing. It's a different time, brother. And I really believe this. And I went to UC Irvine and studied Marxist theory there and history. And it took me a while. What is it Churchill says? If you're not a liberal at 20, you have no heart, and if you're not a conservative by 40, you have no brain. It took me a while. It took me a while to see the flaws in my thinking. And that doesn't mean that I think liberals are bad or Democrats are bad. It does mean that I think the results are in. There's a great book by a guy named Francis Fukuyama called The End of History, and he's writing about the fall of the Soviet Empire in 1989 and the rise of democratic movements in China at that time. We all remember Tiananmen Square. And he was saying, look, man, the results are in. The West has won. It has won the ideological battle to prove what works, and what works is Western Enlightenment. And that's not a racial idea. That's not a white people are better than black people argument. That's an argument about small d democracy. Free markets, freedom, the 10 Amendments, our Bill of Rights. It is about human freedom. So it took me a while to sort of figure that out. And in my 30s, I began to figure it out. And by my 40s, I had come to the conclusion that I had been badly mistaken in my youth.
Now, do you have any other thoughts for our audience?
Oh my gosh, where do we start? Of course I do. We live in a very difficult place. I do want to underscore one thing I've said, because I don't mean to sound hyperbolic when I say that California is important, significant. It is critical to the survival of America. If you look at energy policy in America and global markets on oil right now, or natural gas, California could end much of this if it simply opened up drilling again and the production of natural gas deposits that are everywhere. But here again, the sort of the racial theories of the moment kick in. And what we're told is that pollution is directly designed almost directly to affect minority communities worst. And how do we know this? That if you go and look at the refineries just up north of us here, you and I are in Orange County as we talk, but just north of us off the 405 freeway to the Pacific Ocean side, you can see the big refineries right near the port of Los Angeles. And some people on the left will note that the people who live in the area of the port and of those refineries tend to be poor Latino people. Therefore, they call this an economic injustice. But the fact is, those refineries have been there since long before I was born. And many of the people who live there moved in because they could afford to live there. And they could afford to live there because houses next to a refinery are rather cheap for a reason. Now, if you really wanted to treat those people well, you wouldn't shut down the refinery. I guess you'd buy them a home someplace else, or you wouldn't allow people to live near refineries anymore. But those refineries were there before the residents were there. And every time we in California try to protect the poor or protect black people or Latino people from environmental impacts, we almost invariably end up hurting them through energy policies that make energy more expensive. And they are also, in addition to being black and Latino, they're also humans who rely on energy policies that make sense. And our energy policies make life more expensive for them. Here's a thing for us to think about. The young man who was just murdered by 5 cops in Memphis, Tennessee, Tyree Nichols. I didn't know this until quite recently. Tyree Nichols was from Sacramento. He was a skater kid from Sacramento. He's a black kid who was raised in Sacramento and who left for Tennessee because California had become oppressive. Think about that. In 2020, when he was 26 years old, he looked around at what his options were. 26-year-old man in California, and decided, you know what? Everything's too expensive here. The jobs don't pay enough given the cost of everything. I'm going to move to Memphis and be close to my mom and stepdad. 3 years later, he's murdered by 5 black cops. I'm not saying that Gavin Newsom or the Democrats or bad California policies murdered Tyree Nichols. I am saying that he'd probably still be alive and living in Sacramento if we had a different government.
Will Swain, president of California Policy Center, it was great to have you on California Insider.
Thank you so much for having me, Sam Mack. I look forward to the next time.
If you like the show and our content, you should go to insiderca.com and sign up to our newsletter, because we never know what can happen with social media and other platforms in terms of distributing our content. If you'd like to come on the show and be an insider, you can reach out to us at cainsider@epochtimesca.com. Again, it's cainsider@epochtimesca.com. We would love to have you on the show to tell us what's going on in your field in California. Thank you for watching. Please click the icon on the left to subscribe to our channel. We bring you the most pressing issues California is facing with straightforward and in-depth interviews. See you in the next video.